Okay, thank you. So yeah, obviously the talk is called Why We Are Communists. That's what this session's about. And over the course of this talk, I hope to explain in a kind of a systematic way why we are communists. And the first thing was alluded to in that video is that capitalism is in crisis. We live in a capitalist system, and the system has been in crisis for a long time, actually. 2008 was a fundamental turning point in the history of the world and the history of capitalism. And that crisis, which is often referred to as the financial crisis, was far more than just a financial crisis. It was a global crisis of the capitalist system as a whole, not just in the financial stock markets. And it's a crisis that the system has never recovered from. As you probably know, the capitalist system goes in cycles of boom and bust, periods of growth and periods of slump. And in the early days of capitalism, obviously capitalism has developed the productive forces a huge amount, more than any other system in any other epoch in history. And you had a general pattern of periods of growth, slump, and periods of further growth to new heights. But capitalism has had its heyday, and the 2008 crisis was an extremely deep crisis, an extremely deep slump. And there's been no real recovery. The so-called period of boom that was supposed to follow was the most pathetic period of growth, really. And from the perspective of the working class, there was no boom whatsoever. It was a period of austerity and cuts to public services and falling or stagnant wages compared to prices. And so what this implies is that capitalism is in a kind of organic crisis. It's exhausted its ability to continue to develop the productive forces, particularly in the interests of the working class, if it ever did. And obviously, after the financial crisis in 2008, like I said, there was a long period of extremely weak recovery, only to be followed by another economic crisis that was triggered by the COVID pandemic. And then, of course, with the reopening of the economy, there was a very slight recovery, only to be followed by another crisis. Now we've got an inflation crisis. Britain is forecast to be in recession for the next 2 quarters, and that could trigger a much deeper general slump. And so the picture I'm painting is one of a serious crisis of the capitalist system, and for that reason, a deep pessimism permeates all of society, really, a feeling that the end is near and there's no real hope for the future. And that's not really that surprising, particularly amongst young people, because we've never even known the good times of capitalism. They weren't always good for everyone, but there were times when the general standard of living was rising in this country, for example. If you're 30 years old, I assume most of you are quite a bit younger than that, but even for someone who's 30 years old, right, let's say they became politically conscious around 16 years old. That would be the year 2008, 14 years ago. All they've known is things getting worse, falling living standards, a lack of investment, public services being whittled away, war, climate destruction, just everything getting worse. No one 30 years old or younger can remember anything getting better in a meaningful way. And so it's not surprising that people are drawing extremely radical conclusions. Poverty is increasing. At the moment in Britain, over 4 million children live in poverty, which is an absolute disgrace. Inflation is pushing even more into poverty now. You have mass unemployment. Last year, it was earlier this year, the government announced 91,000 redundancies in the civil service. That's just one sector of the public sector, and you've also got redundancies and wage caps in the private sector and the rest of the public sector. You've got homelessness, which I'm sure you will all have seen within your lifetime, getting worse and worse and worse, and more homeless people on the street. I actually got told yesterday that my rent's going up by £200 a month, so I can't live there anymore, so I'm going to have to find somewhere else. People who find themselves in that situation, which is going to be a lot of people, if they do not have any reserves or any family that can take them in while they look for somewhere else, it is going to mean absolute disaster for millions of families. As well as the unemployment I mentioned, those who are in work and are probably extremely dependent on that work, extremely grateful to just have a very badly paid job. Some people, unfortunately, they're being worked harder and harder for less and less. So from the perspective of the working class, what an irrational system where you've got people being worked ridiculous amounts of hours, harder and harder for less in real terms, and you've got others who are absolutely desperate for work and find themselves unemployed. It makes no sense from the perspective of the working class, but that is how capitalism works. As we've just established with the poverty and the homelessness and the cuts and the climate crisis, there's no shortage of things that need doing from the perspective of the working class. Do we not need houses to be built? Of course we do. We need millions of high-quality, well-insulated homes to be built at an affordable rate for working-class people. Have we forgotten how to build houses? Do we not need doctors and nurses? Do we not need engineers? Do we not need to construct wind turbines and solar farms? Of course we do. All of this is needed, and yet there is no investment. There is no investment in building affordable houses for people. And there is no investment in renewable energy, and there is no investment in training new doctors, and there is no investment in training nurses, teachers, engineers. Why is this not done then? The short answer is it is because of capitalism. The only reason anything gets invested in under capitalism is for private profit, and it is not profitable to feed people who can't afford to pay the market price. It is not profitable to house people who cannot pay a rent that will be profitable for them to bother investing in the production of those houses in the first place. If something is not profitable under capitalism, generally speaking, it will not get done, and that is why all these problems exist. There is a chronic lack of investment, basically, in the private sector, and it is the private sector which dominates the economy under capitalism. And so the point I'm getting at is that capitalism, it has its own laws, it has its own economic laws that cannot be avoided, and they cannot even be reformed away. And that is why we're revolutionaries. If we thought we could increase the living standard of people within the confines of capitalism, improve those living standards in a meaningful way, we might be more likely to settle for reforms, but it appears that that cannot be done by the capitalist system. That is why we're revolutionaries. As well as the glaring injustice that exists in the system. You have insane profits on the one hand, and complete misery on the other. The world's tiny elite of billionaires, that's 2,755 billionaires, has seen its fortunes grow during the COVID-19 pandemic, more than they did in the whole 14 years before that. A huge acceleration in the concentration of wealth. That's the biggest annual increase since records began. And since the pandemic began, a new billionaire has been created every 26 hours. You have this absurd concentration of wealth at one hand and poverty at the other. And of course, millions have lost their lives unnecessarily due to the terrible handling of the COVID pandemic, which again, the blame lies at the feet of the private sector's desire to keep the economy going for the sake of their profits. And the terrible pharmaceutical companies basically playing with the vaccines for the sake of profit rather than making the information public about how to make them, rather than expanding production. They would much rather produce slowly and limit demand and sell the vaccines for a higher rate than invest in loads of factories, churn all of them out as soon as possible, and then have to leave those factories idle. That would be a waste of capital. As far as they're concerned, but in terms of human need, it was of course extremely vital. So across the world, millions of people, I would say, unnecessarily lost their lives. Certainly tens of thousands, and in this country, certainly tens of thousands. And of course, tens and tens of thousands more lose their lives as a result of austerity and cuts to public service and cuts to social care, not to mention suicide and dying on the streets. from the cold and homelessness and all the rest of it. It is a very brutal, violent system that we live in from the perspective of the working class. And of course, we're now going to see that getting even worse with inflation going through the roof, and particularly the price of fuel. This winter is going to hit the working class extremely hard. Climate change is wreaking havoc on the working class all over the world. You probably saw what happened in Pakistan recently with the flooding. That is obviously, there's flooding in that part of the world every year, but it's getting worse and worse and less predictable. This year, I think the flooding affected 33 million people. To put that in context, that's half the population of the UK have been hit by flooding all in one go. Half the population of the UK. Imagine the human catastrophe, whether it's someone's home being destroyed, crops being destroyed, or their livestock being killed, or the disease that spreads as a result of that flooding. It's complete devastation. Is the Pakistani state and the Pakistani ruling class going to mobilise all of the wealth of Pakistan to try and ameliorate that human crisis? Of course it isn't. It would be completely utopian to think that's going to happen. And it's enraging. It's hard to put into words how angry this sort of thing makes me. And that anger exists deep within society, not just amongst revolutionaries. That anger exists within the working class in particular. And for that reason, we live in a time of class struggle. We live in a time of revolution, if you look internationally, revolution and counter-revolution. In Sri Lanka, there has just been a revolution that brought down the government. In Myanmar, 2 years ago, there was an extremely inspiring revolution, an insurrectionary movement against the military dictatorship there. It didn't manage to bring it down in the end, but it was extremely heroic. It was a revolutionary movement nonetheless. In Sudan, I think this began in 2018, there's been a revolution going on, and it's still going on, and it's actually now in a period of counter-revolution. It's not yet clear where the chips will fall, but the revolutionary movement is on the back foot, but a revolution nonetheless. And thank you. Britain is not exempt from these types of circumstances. Britain is not far behind these types of countries. We do live in a time of intense class struggle. In Britain, for example, the trade unions are beginning to wake up. Mick Lynch, who's one of the leaders of the RMT, said the working class is back. And of course, the working class has always been there, but what it means is it's becoming aware of itself as a class again, with distinct interests, and it is thinking about taking its own, it's been forced to take its own matters into its own hands and say, we will not have this anymore. And that's why you've got within the trade union movement, where you had little strikes here and there, one workplace deciding to fight against their employer on the basis of pay or workplace bullying or redundancies or whatever. Now you have workers being balloted on a national level. Every worker within a particular workplace across the whole country being balloted to strike at once. National strikes basically are looming, and that could lead to strikes across different industries, general strikes. Huge class battles are on the order of the day. And in a time like this, if you live in a time of class struggle and war and crisis and revolution, if you ask me, the best thing you can do is stare that reality in the face and match up to the period of history you're living through. What could possibly be more fulfilling if you live through a time of huge, significant movements to try and change society? What could be more important than taking part in those movements to try and change society? Unless, of course, you're completely satisfied with the way society is today, in which case I'm not going to convince you of anything. But if you're not satisfied and you feel that anger burning inside you, what better thing could you do than take part in these events that are beginning to come and will continue to come? It's like what Che Guevara said. He said, if you tremble with indignation at every injustice, then you are a comrade of mine. And we do tremble at these injustices. And we always have. Even in the good times, there were whole layers of the working class that were living in brutal conditions, especially when you take in the international context. Loads of unnecessary deaths, whether it's from hunger, malaria, a very curable disease, just drinking dirty water and dying of diarrhea. I mean, what a desperate, humiliating state of affairs for humanity to find itself in, given the capacity we have to actually provide for everyone. The fact that now more and more people are becoming militant and revolutionary and wanting to change society. To me, that's an extremely positive thing. So while the ruling class may be extremely pessimistic about the future, we're extremely optimistic. We're filled with a revolutionary optimism because we were already dissatisfied and we're living through a time where we have a chance to try and change society. That's why we're anti-capitalists, that's why we're revolutionaries. I still have work to do to explain why we're communists, because obviously it's one thing to know what you're against, but we need to know what we are for. And in order to change the world and know what is possible for us to build, we have to understand the world and how we got to where we are. The type of crises that I've described above, they will and they already are creating revolutionary movements. And in the grand scheme of things, if you zoom out and look at history, our class, the working class, is in the ascendancy. Once the working class moves into action, it can overthrow a government. It can even topple a whole regime with a relatively spontaneous mass movement. Again, just look at what happened in Sri Lanka. This year they brought down the government with that insurrectionary movement. Think about the Arab Spring in 2011. A revolutionary movement swept through North Africa and into the Middle East, toppling dictator after dictator. Of course, it wasn't easy. It required a huge amount of sacrifice and mobilization, but with relative ease. It shows you the power of the working class. But what cannot be done spontaneously is come up with a program and a party that can transform society fundamentally. Those dictators were toppled, but the economic reasons, right, for the inequality and the injustice and the anger were not resolved. The economic contradictions, the economic laws of capitalism, if you like, they were not resolved because they didn't have a program to overcome capitalism and replace it with a new type of society. And so none of the problems have been solved in those places. And so the point I'm making is that these economic phenomena, the economic laws of capitalism, they kind of, if you don't understand them, they impose themselves on us like a force of nature. And reformist people, even on the left, even very well-intentioned reformist politicians, they don't see anything other than capitalism as a way of organising society. And so the laws of capitalism, they literally do impose themselves on people like a law of nature. I mean, when have you ever heard a satisfactory explanation of why we are even in this economic crisis in the first place? Where have you heard a satisfactory explanation of why there's economic stagnation, why there's a trade war developing between loads of different powers in the world? Why is the EU fracturing apart economically? Why is there a lack of investment? Why is there rampant inflation? Where have you ever heard a decent explanation for that? And the reason you don't get one is because if people don't understand capitalism, which the reformists don't, they just think it is the natural state of things rather than a particular stage of history with a particular system, with a particular set of dynamics. It seems like these things, they just happen, right? Just like the wind happens, right? Or like the rain happens. Or like gravity imposes itself on us. And so these reformist politicians, like I said, even the most well-intentioned left ones, and even capitalist economists, they have no idea how to solve this crisis. They don't even know why it's happening, let alone how to solve it. And that is what Marxism is for. It is the most developed ideas the world has ever seen in philosophy, history, and economics. And with this, we can understand the laws of human development. And we can understand those forces, the economic forces that impose themselves on us. And we can understand, therefore, what the barrier is that we need to overcome in order to essentially harness those laws and use them in our own interest. And that's why we're communists. We want to move beyond capitalism and get rid of those barriers that are stopping the further development. Like I said, we can build wind turbines, but we don't. You know, we can build solar panels, but we don't. We can build good quality housing, but we don't. We want to unleash that potential. This is what Karl Marx said in the Communist Manifesto about the role of communists. He said, the communists, therefore, are on the one hand, practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. They are that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, the communists have, over the great mass of the working class, the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the working class movement. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all other working class parties: formation of the working class into a class, overthrow of the bourgeoisie, conquest of political power by the proletariat. That means the working class. So what he's saying is that as communists, and to be precise, as Marxists, which is socialism and communism made scientific. As communists, we are not separate from the movement of the working class. We're a part of it. We're a part of its struggle, but with the ultimate aim of giving the working class the ideas that it needs, the political program that it needs, and very importantly, the organisation that it needs to carry that out. The organisation it needs not only to overthrow this bankrupt government that we have, but to overthrow the bankrupt system of capitalism itself. And this would lay the foundations for the working class to further develop itself as a class, to further develop humanity as a whole, I would say, and organise society in its own interests for the first time, to organise society in the interests of the working class. That is what socialism and communism means to a Marxist. So I should kind of explain a little bit about what Marxism is. I'm not going to be able to do it justice. It is an extremely broad method that can be applied to everything: human thought, human history, nature itself. We'll have plenty of other sessions on that, I'm sure, and running reading groups, and you can check out the YouTube channel on Socialist Appeal, and the website is it's a treasure trove that never ends. But I'll try and outline some of the key pillars of Marxism. It started as a philosophy, and that philosophy is called dialectical materialism, which, as you can tell by that name, has kind of two parts to it: dialectical and materialism. The materialism part means it's a materialist philosophy, and that means that we consider matter to be primary. That's what it means by materialism. It means we seek to explain nature in terms of nature alone, to explain matter in terms of matter alone, not trying to introduce some mystical or supernatural element from outside when we reach sort of the limit of our understanding, right? Often a kind of mystical element will come in when we reach the limit of our understanding. For us, we've just reached a certain horizon in what we know now, but that horizon can be pushed further back with study and investigation and all the rest of it. That's what a materialist approach to philosophy is. That's a summary of materialism. Most importantly, we consider matter in motion to be the basis of everything. Matter in motion. And that emphasis on motion, that is the dialectical part of dialectical materialism. It is therefore a philosophy of motion and a philosophy of change. It's the understanding that everything is always changing, right? Nothing is permanent, nothing is fixed, everything is always changing. And therefore to think that anything can remain the same forever is unscientific and delusional. And that applies to human history as well. The capitalist system is not infinite, it is not immovable, and it will not last forever. And so you can see that Marxism is therefore a very revolutionary philosophy. Dialectical materialism is a very revolutionary philosophy. It's one thing to understand that things are always changing, but really the task is to discover the specific way in which change takes place, its patterns and its laws of motion. And from a philosophical basis like that, we can look at history and human society, like I said before, in a completely new way. This was a real breakthrough of Marxism, is that it began to view human history in a scientific way and discover the general laws and patterns that drive change in human development. And so you can start to understand the arc of history rather than it being a series of accidents or individual actions on the whims of this or that king or whatever, It starts to draw general laws of motion that have been driving history forward. and include that history has specific stages of development. Capitalism is just one of those epochs, it's one of those stages of development, like feudalism before it, for example. And if everything can be understood scientifically and as a process of change, then human history and society is no exception. That's the kind of historical pillar of Marxism. And then the third pillar of Marxism, obviously they're completely related, the third pillar of Marxism is economics, which flows from this philosophy as well. And Marx dedicated the vast majority of his life's work to Das Kapital, which is not a detailed explanation of what communism is going to look like. It's an extremely thorough scientific investigation of the way that capitalism actually works. And just as importantly, how it does not work. And that is really important. Again, of course, I don't have time to explain that in detail. That's why the book's so big and it took his whole life. But a simple way of defining what we mean by the capitalist epoch is it is an economic system that is dominated by the production and exchange of commodities. Commodity production and exchange. Now, a commodity is something that is produced to be exchanged on the market. It is not produced to be consumed by the person who produced it. Right? If I grow a courgette in my garden and I eat it, that's not a commodity. It's just I grew a courgette and I ate it. If I grow that very same courgette and sell it on the market, that is a commodity, right? So it's not the matter itself. It's not the form. It's the content that determines what I mean by a commodity. And that was not always the case. That was not always the dominant way in which human needs were met by the economy, such as feudalism or ancient slave society, for example, ancient Rome and Greece. They had a different driving force in terms of the main mode of production. In capitalism, it is the production of commodities for exchange on the market. And beneath that system, there is a relationship, and the dominant relationship in capitalism is the relationship between labour and capital, and they are the dominant classes in capitalism. Labour is required to produce commodities, but those commodities they are owned by capital, right? Because capital provided the means of production. So capital needs labour to produce commodities, and labour, because it doesn't have, the proletariat the working class do not have the ability to produce on their own. They have to sell their labour power to a capitalist. And that means the capitalist owns all the commodities that is produced by labour. And that is a contradiction. It means that particularly in the hard times, those opposing interests really come to the fore. It means that profit comes from the labour of the working class. And the class struggle is therefore, under capitalism, is the struggle over what proportion of the wealth produced is going to go to the working class and what is going to be kept by the capitalist as profit. That is really what is behind the class struggle. This is all obviously simplified, but true nonetheless. And this actually is the beginning of the explanation of why capitalism goes into crisis. You've got a whole session on that next week. But really, profit is the difference between the value of all the commodities that labour produces for a capitalist. Let's say 10 workers make 10 cars, each worth £1,000. That's £10,000 worth of cars. Now, if they can't pay the workers £10,000 for the cars they've made because they won't be able to make profit if they sell them for £10,000. So they have to pay the workers less than that. That difference is where profit comes from, and that difference, applied on the scale of the whole economy, actually means that not enough wages have been paid out to buy back all the things that have been produced. We have a crisis of overproduction. That is what is behind every slump in capitalism. And that is getting deeper and deeper now because the level of overproduction is so huge. And what I'm essentially saying is the market cannot absorb back all the commodities that we are capable of producing. Because capitalism develops our ability to produce so much faster than the population grows and the needs of people grow, and particularly, they cannot buy it back because they're not paid the full value of what they produce in the first place. Loans and credit are a way of expanding the market artificially, but all it means is that the level of production is further and further expanded and eventually it becomes clear that that debt is never going to pay back, and it just means a much deeper crisis. And that's why the crises are getting deeper and deeper, and the recoveries of capitalism are getting weaker and weaker. And that is the contradiction between labour and capital, and it is the contradiction between the production of useful things. But for a capitalist, they're not interested in the specific thing they're producing. Because commodities are not produced for use, they're produced for exchange. The capitalist is only interested in whether they are going to be able to exchange that commodity for more money than they started with. And that contradiction between the production of use values, i.e. commodities, and the money is fundamental to the contradictions of capitalism and the crises we continuously find ourselves in. Socialism resolves that contradiction. It is the production of use values for the sake of their usefulness, not for the sake of being able to exchange them for more money at the end. It's essentially the production for need and not profit. That's the simplest way of putting it. And so what I'm saying is that capitalism is actually, it's in terminal crisis. And I would say capitalism is pregnant with socialism already. Social production already exists. No one produces everything they need. We're all completely interdependent. In fact, even the workers who produce one commodity rarely produce that whole commodity. They produce a part of it on a production line. And they might even get their parts from a different company which produces those parts on a production line. No one produces as an individual anymore. We produce socially, and on a global scale. The supply chain is so complex. Thank you. So yes, social production exists. Mass plans of production exist. They just, like, supply chains are planned to extreme accuracy by huge international corporations, but they plan it in the interest of maximizing their profits rather than planning for the needs of people as a whole. So we have social production on a global scale, we have mass planning on a global scale, we have abundance, which is fundamental to being able to build a healthy, democratic, socialist society, and we have a highly educated, highly powerful working class. The organisations of the working class are the biggest organisations in the world. The biggest union in this country has 1.4 million members, and that's just one union. It's the biggest one, but it's only one of them. Another one has 1.1 million, and there's loads of others. And that's at a time of relatively low union density. That is set to grow as the class battles increase. And the size of the organisations of the working class, I think they're the biggest organisations really that have ever existed. And this shows the revolutionary character of the working class as a democratic organising force. The point I'm making is socialism already exists in potential. That all of the material necessity for the working class to run society according to a plan with abundance in their own interest, that already exists in potential. The task of the Socialist Revolution and the Marxist organisation is to make real what already exists in potential. And for that reason, I would say we are swimming with the tide of history. The ruling class is desperately trying to stop this process, but they cannot stop it. And it's for that reason that the philosophy of the ruling class, the media, the culture of the ruling class is filled with this terminal pessimism. And we as Marxists and Communists are filled with revolutionary optimism. And that is why you should join us. Because we have ideas that can make you optimistic. We can make you not passively witness the chaos of capitalism, but actively intervene in it, as the working class will be forced to, and take our own destiny and our own futures into our own hands. And we need your help to build the necessary organisation. And if you do want to change society, then you need us as well. You need our ideas, and you need an organisation. You cannot do anything as a socialist on your own. And if I really think there is no greater cause on earth, and if I am going to appeal to you to join us and help us fight for socialism, I should briefly outline what socialism will look like, what we mean by socialism, and what it really means for humanity and our future. I would say it is no less than the unleashing of a whole new phase of development. The Soviet Union proved this, that it is not just possible in theory or in the abstract, but it proved in practice, in concrete, steel, machinery and technology, that you can run an economy. Not just a small one, you can run an economy the size of a continent without private property, without profit, and to do so with remarkable results. Now, this is despite the terrible, criminal mismanagement of the planned economy of the Soviet Union, but it still achieved remarkable things. This is a quote from a book by the founder of our tendency, actually, a guy called Ted Grant, and the book's called Russia, From Revolution to Counter-Revolution. And I quote, "Socialism means the harmonization of the economy. It means planning rather than the anarchy of capitalist production today. The results of a planned economy can be seen in the transformation of Russia after 1917. Productivity of labour rose by 1,310%, as compared to only 332% in the USA in the same period, and just 73% in Britain. 1,310% in the planned economy of the Soviet Union, compared to 73% in Britain. Life expectancy in Russia doubled, and child mortality fell by 9 times. And the country had more doctors per 100,000 people than any of Italy, Austria, West Germany, even the USA, Britain, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, or Japan. The planned economy is superior to the market economy. Enough food is produced for over 10 billion people today, with a population of 7.5 billion. It's a whole third, again, more is required. And yet 1 billion people live in hunger. We can build affordable insulated houses, but we don't. We can provide renewable energy for the whole of the global electricity demand by wind power. That is possible. A study called Offshore Wind Outlook 2019 discovered that. But we don't. We can provide incredible healthcare, but we don't. You look around the world and it is chaos, irrationality, and greed. Are they seriously telling us that a planned economy, even a terribly mismanaged planned economy, are they seriously telling us that couldn't achieve better results than this? Don't make me laugh. Of course it could. The amount of wealth that sits idle and is spent on the most frivolous things, if it's spent at all, could solve so many problems. The wealth exists in society. And that's the worst case scenario, right? The kind of Soviet Union thing. That's not even socialism. That's a caricature of socialism. A deformed workers' state is what we call it. A mismanaged planned economy with no democracy. We can achieve so much more than that. Like I said before, the working class is more capable of running society than ever before. It's highly educated. It basically already does run society. It just runs society for a few shareholders that it never meets and who have nothing to do with the productive process. The capitalist class has become entirely parasitical, essentially. Shareholders who have nothing to do with production, sucking all of the value of labour out of the economy. And democracy in a planned economy is vital to a healthy worker state. We mean workers' democracy, not the type of democracy you see now. If you want, if you want a democratic plan of production and distribution, then you need democracy in the workplace. That is the centre of production. That's where democracy has to begin, in the workplace. In capitalism, where we spend most of our life in the workplace, we're supposed to live in a democracy. The workplace is a dictatorship. If you're employed by a private company that is owned privately, and you do what you're told. And that makes perfect sense from the perspective of the capitalist. It would be mad for them to let the workers organise democratically and make their own mind up. But on the basis of a planned economy, you need democracy in the workplace. That would be the metric by which you would decide, if we're talking about production for need, not profit, how do you determine need? Well, you need democracy in the workplace to be that metric. So just imagine what we're talking about in socialism. Imagine a society where you could fully mobilise all of the human potential. Instead of having people overworked on the one hand and people desperate for work on the other, you could have full employment, fully mobilise all of our productive capacity, but allow you to shorten the working day for everyone while producing more, by eradicating profit, the obscene profits. Everyone could be paid more for doing less work and producing more, which would mean more time to participate in the democratic running of society. You could even have paid meetings in the workplace where you go and you make decisions and you discuss the progress, you discuss the flaws, and you re-elect your manager if you've elected someone who's not fulfilling their responsibility. It would mean more time to care for your children, to look after your home, to look after your community, to take part in restorative justice if local disputes happen. You could have collective childcare, more time to develop yourself culturally, physically, spiritually. What we're talking about is a complete uplift of humanity to a new cultural level, I think. And those things, in fact, are the best guarantee against any kind of authoritarian, bureaucratic dictatorship. A highly productive society with abundance, a highly educated working class, and most importantly, a highly level of education within the Revolutionary Party itself. There are no guarantees. Okay, I'll sum up right now. There are no guarantees against those things. It's a living struggle. And so, although I say this will be a new era of human development, a complete spiritual uplift, we're not utopians, right? Like the fight for socialism, the class struggle, will not be milk and honey. That's why they call it the class struggle. It will be tough, and we're going to live through tough times anyway. Even after, let's say, a successful socialist revolution, even after the working class comes to power in one country, the international struggle remains. There will be revolution, there will be counter-revolution, victories and defeats, betrayal. And even a successful socialist society will not be a perfect world. Of course it won't. That would be absurd. But what I can't promise you that. But what I can promise you is the abolition of classes and the elevation of the working class to a new and higher stage of existence. This would allow for abundance available to all. We could begin the harmonisation of humanity with the rest of the natural world, which would be the next great task in combating climate change. And this could even lead to the breaking down of borders and prejudices and the withering of all divisions that plague our society, like racism. It could even lead to the withering away of the state and money itself. And I want to finish on a quote by Trotsky, who talks about this, the potential withering away of money. Because I think we don't think money is the root of all evil. Like I said, it's the relations in society, the mode of production, and the contradictions of the particular system we live in. Money has an important function. But this quote about the withering away of money shows us a bit about our method, the method of dialectical materialism, historical materialism, and it's also extremely inspiring. Trotsky said this about money. He said, "This will mean that socialism, having freed itself from capitalist fetishes, is beginning to create a more lucid, free, and worthy relation among people. Money cannot be arbitrarily abolished, nor can the state and the old family form be liquidated. They have to exhaust their historic mission. Only then can they evaporate and fall away. The final death blow to money fetishism will be struck only at that stage when the steady growth of social wealth has made us bipeds forget our miserly attitude towards every excess minute of our labour, and to forget our humiliating fear about the size of our own ration. Having lost its ability to bring happiness or to trample men in the dust, money will turn into mere bookkeeping receipts for the convenience of statisticians and for the planning purposes of the economy. In this still more distant future, probably these receipts will not be needed, but we can leave this question entirely to future generations who will be more intelligent than we are." Thank you very much.
Hello everyone. I think Joe's given a lovely lead off on why we're communists, and I'd say if you look at Britain now, the working class is moving into struggle, and being a member of Socialist Appeal, it's always been like, whenever I'm in the union, I'm talking about Marxism. Now, a lot of people go, "Oh, communists!" A lot of young people in particular, they're like, "These ideas, I agree with them, because we need to change society fundamentally." The thing is that you see, I don't know if you heard, the dockers in Felixstowe in Liverpool, they went on strike. And just yesterday, the Southampton dockers went and they refused the diverted cargo from the Liverpool ports, the docks. And that's, the working class in action. It instinctively understands, that need for solidarity and unity, and the struggle between the capitalists on one hand and the working class on the other. And I say the thing is that, our tasks as communists and Marxists is really taking these ideas, like, you know, educating young people, like most of us sat here, and taking them into the real movement and trying to get that, win over that movement to a program that's based on scientific socialism, on how to successfully overthrow capitalism. Like, you know, and so it's, you know, it's not just like all the comrades have said, it's not just an academic exercise. And for example, like, you know, I work in the Southampton General Hospital as an auxiliary nurse, and I see day in, day out, you know, the results of like drug overdoses, things like that. It's getting more and more common. Suicide cases, attempted suicides. It's what, like, you know, you see all of these things that could be prevented. Like, you know, Engels called it social murder. Like, you know, because of all of these people dying because of preventable causes. And the thing is that, you know, with these ideas, despite of all the terrible things that's happening, it's given me a lot of revolutionary optimism to go into the movement, win over more people to these ideas, and eventually win over the mass organizations of the working class to these ideas as well. That's what we're about. And so I'd say, like, you know, the working class is moving into action. But Karl Marx said, like, you know, ideas become a material force when they grip the minds of the masses. And like, that's the task really of the Marxists, like, you know, to build a strong revolutionary organization, not just in Britain, but across the world. That's why we're part, Socialist Appeal is part of the international Marxist tendency, and we're active in over 40 countries now. And, you know, that's the task of us, and I appeal to everyone here to join. Thank you.